Good afternoon, PACEA participants, or good morning as the case may be. I'm Georgie Hoddle from Nurses Christian Fellowship. Today I'll be speaking about the International Code of Ethics and its relevance to spiritual care. But before I do that, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm recording this video. That is the Awabakal people. Awabakal means eagle, and I do feel God is in this presentation. So we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. To be effective, the ICN Code of Ethics for Nurses must be familiar to them. The ICN encourages its dissemination and advises national nursing associations to adopt this code, translating it into local languages or using it as a framework to support their own code of nursing ethics. The code is also cited in two courses I teach, the Saline Process Witness Training and the new Spiritual Care for Australian Nurses course. This talk will describe the code. It will flag 5 top ethical issues in healthcare and provide some examples of how some of these issues are addressed by Christian and non-Christian nurses. As I said, we're going to be addressing 5 top ethical issues, which are balancing care quality and efficiency, improving access to care, building and sustaining the workforce of the future, addressing end-of-life issues, and allocating limited medications and donor organs with the expected outcomes. Hopefully, there will be some good outcomes from this. You will have learned and refresh your knowledge of the ICN Code of Ethics. You will take responsibility and be accountable. Understand that Christian nurses should address spiritual care, but in many countries cannot do so or proselytize, as it may cause harm. It's beyond the scope of practice and it breaches boundaries in many cases. See the link below for a case from the United Kingdom. I will conclude with recommendations for applying the elements of the ICN Code of Ethics for nurses as at 2021, in line with 3 primary duties for nurses, among many others, which are the duty of autonomy, confidentiality, and duty of care. These are well defined in our Australian Nursing Standards for Practice 2016 Standard Number 1. A list of references will also be made available. The International Code of Nurses and the International Confederation of Midwives Code of Ethics took effect as the guiding documents for ethical decision-making for nurses and midwives in Australia just on March the 1st, 2018. The ICN Code of Ethics of 2018 remains current in Australia despite a major revision, and that was in October 2021, that revision. So why do we have an international code? The need for nursing is universal, we know that. Inherent in nursing is respect for human rights, including cultural rights, the right to life, the right to dignity, and the right to be treated with respect. Referring nurses and midwives to the existing international publications is a natural progression of the ICN and the ICM ethics documents, as they are recognised globally and are contextually relevant for all nurses and midwives. I would be interested to hear if other national nursing registration bodies have their own nursing code of ethics or adopt either the 2021 version or the earlier 2012 version. As an example, I'll quote the Taiwanese Citizen Consensus Conference, which used the Delphi technique and questionnaire survey in the revision process of their code. The final draft was approved by the General Assembly of Taiwan, National Union of Nurses Associations, in 2007. This revised Code of Ethics for nurses in Taiwan was proposed in 6 parts with 27 articles, including fundamental responsibilities of nurses, nurses and clients, nurses and professional services, and social interactions and teamwork, and professional growth. This revised Taiwanese Code of Ethics for nurses has new elements, including environmental protection, personal safety, lifetime learning, and self-care. This is very similar to the ICN Code of Ethics for Nurses revised October 2021, which has a greater focus on the role of nurses in global health and the ethical dilemmas the profession faces. Speaking of Taiwan, you may remember I spoke about being available to God and what that looked like. I finished by asking you all a question. Is he calling you to be more available? As I recounted back then, with my sister Marcel's permission, I had made the ethical choice to stay with her by her trauma hospital bed and not travel to Taiwan to deliver a keynote talk. Although I was the most disappointed person amongst many others, I trusted that God had a mission for me. God has once again asked me to be available, and I've had to make the same decision. Either once again sit by Marcel's trauma bed, this is a recent photo, and after her motor vehicle accident, comfort, feed, hydrate, and minister to her, or meet the PACEA deadline. So I thank Alicia and Junie for the extensions to present my text for translation and send the video very late. Now, after 4.5 years, the PACEA conference is totally online due to the ongoing COVID pandemic. Who saw that coming? Well, I believe God did, because back then I was quite discouraged and my heart was very sad, as it is now. But we know from Jeremiah 29, verse 11, for I know the plans I have for you, the plans for good and not for disaster, to give you future and a hope. Because we are at a crossroads in our nursing practice. When back in June I submitted my abstract, I had no idea what God had planned for me. I was studying the ICN Code of Ethics 2021 in order to update the IHS Global Saline Process online community resources. And my thanks go to the IHS Global team and for the rapid review of the code, the new slides, and the trainer's manual material, and the comments that you can see there on relevance to spiritual care in nursing practice. First adopted in 1953, the code covers ethical values, responsibilities, and professional accountabilities of nurses in a bid to define and guide ethical nursing practice. However, these are big questions being asked, at least here in Australia. Is ethics still a thing? In the most recent hospital my sister was in, there was a poster announcing a conference with the title, Ethics? Nope. Open to interpretation and discussion, the new code is, in fact, used as a guide by nurses in everyday choices. The revised code highlights the need to protect and support nurses. Okay, it also states that we have to ensure they have the appropriate education, training, and resources to provide the highest quality of care to all patients. Although this is a lot of information and it all may start looking a bit like a blur, because according to the ICN, the code is used in many countries around the world as part of their regulatory processes and as a framework for ethical conduct. The code is revised every 10 years. Howard Caton, Chief Executive of the ICN, told Nursing Times that the biggest change within its revised code was its focus on nurses and global health, which has been given its own chapter. It also considers how nurses contribute and work towards the achievement of 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which aim to deliver transformative change for all people in all countries by 2030. This involves dealing with the large amount of plastic waste produced on the wards and other nursing areas. Now, the ICN President Annette Kennedy further said that the new code aimed to reflect and highlight the changing working environments of nurses, as well as the challenges and ethical dilemmas that the profession faces, something that she said had been brought forward during COVID-19. Used as a guide by nurses in everyday choices. we have said this. The revised code highlights the need to protect and support nurses and ensure they have the appropriate education, training and resources. So that is fairly new from the ICN Code of Ethics 2012, which is the one still in being used in Australia. I'm not sure in your countries, and perhaps in the Q&A we can discuss this. The ICN Code of Ethics also wishes in 2012 to instill in learners the need to safeguard individuals, families or communities when endangered by healthcare personnel. Because a nurse shares with society as a professional and a citizen, and initiates and supports appropriate action to meet health and social needs of the public. And in the 2012 Code of Ethics, there is the personal health definition of nurses that they need to have mental, physical, social and spiritual well-being. That has been removed from the 2021 revision. Yes, so the October 2021 version of the code is built on the 2012 version, and it is a statement of ethical values, responsibilities and professional standards of nurses. It guides everyday ethical nursing practice and can serve as a regulatory tool to guide and define ethical nursing practice. The ICN says it must be available to students and nurses throughout their study and work lives. The 4 elements of the ICN Code of Nurses, nurses and people, nurses and practice, nurses in the profession, and nurses and co-workers, gives a framework for the standards of conduct. The code serves as a critical model for ethical standards in the nursing profession, stressing responsibility and advocacy for the human rights of patients, their families and communities, as well as social issues, the work of nurses within healthcare systems and working with other healthcare professionals. So what I've just stated is actually summarized in this slide. We will go on now. Nurses have a duty to make the interests of people their first concern and to practice safely and effectively in Australia. The code is consistent with the national law. Is that so in your countries? It includes 7 principles of conduct grouped into domains, each with an explanatory value statement. And I advise you to read the edition that has been made available on the WUHA site. There are 4 moral principles: beneficence, non-maleficence, autonomy, and justice. Now, I've mapped these to biblical texts, which you can take note of and read later. We don't have time now, but I will proceed to go into more detail about the 5 top ethical issues in healthcare, which are raised in the context of the new Code of Conduct, Code of Ethics. So we're going to be looking at the things I outlined at the beginning: the balancing care quality and efficiency, improving access to care, building and sustaining the healthcare workforce of the future, addressing end-of-life issues, allocating limited medications and donor organs. So the first point, we all know how difficult it is, as each of the hospitals and care facilities have their own policies and procedures documents. As Christian nurses, we have the Bible, which trains us. I refer to Psalm 41 verse 3 and the New Living Translation. A slide from ancient times. There are many more biblical guidelines as outlined in the saline process, but we also have our Australian spiritual care for Australian nurses, and it has been updated and relevant to current APRA and Nursing and Midwifery Board standards, codes and guidelines. And it refers to the Code of Conduct, the Code of Ethics. So in building and sustaining the healthcare workforce, which is a major issue for the baby boomer generation like myself as we age, many of us are living with chronic illness, and we will require more nurses to take care of and support us. It raises the ethical issue: will there be enough competent, compassionate people who enter the training and subsequently the workforce and remain there to care? Nursing shortages are worldwide and retention is another problem, especially with the COVID situation. And here I would like to just draw a short pause to remember the hundreds, actually thousands of nurses and other healthcare workers who have lost their lives in assisting patients with COVID. Nurses require an ethical practice environment where they can practice with integrity, where they are not constantly barraged with morally distressing situations that cause harm and burnout, and their own spiritual needs need to be assessed and supported. Unfortunately, the 2021 version of the ICN Code of Ethics removed that definition I showed you earlier. So addressing end-of-life issues. Well, it's another area where ethical issues have to be made about the support and financing of aging populations. And how do nurses and doctors decide who gets the care, or who gets the ventilator? People are now living longer due to excellent care and social conditions in many countries, perhaps not so in many PACEA ones. Many of the publications in the field of spiritual care come from the highly specialized field of palliative care. And just very quickly, the last point is allocating limited medications to donor organs is more a medical surgical issue, but nurses are there in the team and would be well aware of the ethical issues involved in this difficult area. For reasons of time, I can't talk more about this, but it has been an issue for more than 10 years. In summary, as a clinical nurse educator, I have researched the implementation of the International Council of Nurses Code of Ethics 2012 for in-services and courses I've taught, as well as conference presentations in the field of disability. As stated previously, this code is also cited in 2 courses I teach, the SPWT and the SCAN. Many countries, including Australia, only adopted the International Code of Ethics in recent years. And this version, reviewed and revised in October 21, further clarifies that nurses are to acknowledge and be respectful of patients' religious or spiritual beliefs. And here I have element 1.2 of the code, which directs nurses to promote an environment in which the human rights, values, customs, religious and spiritual beliefs of the individual, families and communities are acknowledged and respected by everyone. The code emphasizes person-centered care, which values and respects the characteristics, the attributes and preferences of the patient, such as cultural and religious beliefs, and incorporates them into the planning and implementation of nursing care services or programs design. Therefore, nurses have a mandate to attend to spiritual assessments of our patients in order to draw up a plan of practice for nursing care. This can be achieved by asking for permission while addressing the patient with sensitivity and respect, demonstrating a Christ-like character in our practice. I will leave you with some examples from countries such as the Philippines and Singapore. I found in the Philippines Code of Ethics, a registered nurse must consider the individuality and totality of patients when they administer care. They respect the spiritual beliefs and practices of patients regarding diet and treatment, uphold rights of individuals, and take into consideration the culture and values of patients in providing nursing care. However, in conflicts, their welfare and safety must take precedence. An interesting paper to read by 2 Australian authors that was published in the Singapore Nursing Journal provides insight into the points raised above, and it presents a case study of a patient who makes a complaint about a nurse who invades his privacy and decision-making capacity regarding the commencement of artificial feeding to sustain his life and involvement in his family. He, in fact, didn't want the artificial feeding. An ethical decision-making model to support patient choice is described, and that is a very valid paper to read. All right, the final conclusions. Healthcare workers have a legal an ethical responsibility to protect the patients they care for. Ignored responsibilities make patients suffer. Healthcare workers can be held responsible for these behaviours. Ethical behaviour or responsibility is doing the right thing for the patient. For example, the Nursing Code of Ethics is a lengthy document that covers ethical expectations in detail, and some examples of unethical behaviours include fraud and neglect, which can include neglect of addressing spiritual care if the patient requests and consents to it, because if we do it incorrectly, it could lead to spiritual distress for that person. So the last slide here is how to apply the ICN Code of Ethics. These are all, this text is taken from the code itself. Study the standards under each element of the code. Refer to relevant national standards for practice. Reflect on what each standard means to you in your context. Discuss the code with co-workers and others. Hold workshops and seminars, and use a specific example from experience to identify ethical dilemmas and standards of conduct as outlined in the code. And just remember, the 3 primary duties of nurses, among many others, are the duty of autonomy, confidentiality, and duty of care to all patients. I would like to say thank you at this point and thank the organisers of PACEA. You've worked so hard, and I would like to invite you to the Q&A to ask and have some questions answered. The very, very last slide is in fact the list of references, and this talk can be made available to others, I believe, for 90 days. Thank you, and God bless.